Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Read and Reread. I am Angelia, and today I'm doing a tag video. Please excuse if you can hear the super loud air conditioner motor, because I have mentioned before, I talked about this all last summer. The big, I don't know, the big square thing that sits outside, it's right outside this window, and it is never going to stop until about Thanksgiving because it's, I don't know, 90 something degrees. So bear with it. I'll try to speak loudly. And this tag is the Sir Isaac Newton tag, which was created by Reading Ideas. And I was tagged by Pat of Book Chat with Pat. So thank you, Pat. And I will link those other channels in the description box. So check it out. And so these questions, I guess they all relate to Sir Isaac Newton, either as a person or his scientific theories. I don't know that much about him except whatever we all read in the fifth grade science textbook, as I was an English major. But so some of these I'm thinking, what did that have to do with him? But I don't know. But I'm just going to do them because they're fun questions. I have endeavored and only partially succeeded in this tag to pick out some books that I haven't talked about recently or maybe have never talked about. And because somebody close to me that I bestowed life upon recently said that I use the same books all the time. So I was hearing that in my mind and trying to branch out. I mean, I can't help it if certain books are just so epic that they just satisfy every possible prompt and every tag, and so they keep coming up, or I want to make sure everybody reads them. Can I be blamed for this? But I did try to pick some slightly different books to fit these prompts. Did not entirely succeed. So here we go. Adopted or sent away or abandoned. Name a book with a character who is adopted, sent away, or abandoned. And for this one, there's so many great answers. About 12 of them fell into my head, but I sifted through to pick out one that I haven't talked about, or at least not recently, and I chose Anne of Green Gables by Lucy Maud Montgomery. This is my copy of the book that I've had since I was a kid, but somebody else had it before me. This is a 1965 edition, although the book was first written in 1908. This one has some nice color plates, and there's an inscription from the previous owner where someone named Elizabeth received this from her grandparents in 1966. I probably got it about 10 years later. But I've always loved this book, and it, of course, is an adoption story. Anne Shirley is adopted by a brother and sister pair, an unmarried brother and sister who live together and work a farm, named Matthew and Marilla. But they intended to adopt a boy who could help Matthew with farm work, but they received a girl, a very talkative, bright, energetic, opinionated, ginger-haired girl named Anne. And they have kind of a bumpy beginning, but then a wonderful found family develops. And so it is one of my favorite childhood books. And my favorite scene is the infamous cordial drinking scene with her friend Diana. And I always say this, but just talking about it again makes me want to reread the book. So that's my answer to number one. Number two, Use or Measurement of Time, a book where time is a crucial element. Very literally, I'm going to say Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel, which I know I have talked about on more than one occasion, but it is about time travel, and I love a good time travel book, and time is very precise in this book. There is a main character named Gaspare who is a time traveler, and he has a specific job, and he's searching for an anomaly that is occurring. There's a certain juncture where the barriers between the awareness of time's continuum has become too thin, and things are seeping through. This is kind of hard to explain. You'll have to read the book, but he's going to examine these anomalies that have been occurring over time again and again, and I don't know if he's going to repair or they're trying to prove or disprove a certain theory as well in the story. But I love this book. It's a science fiction book. It has to do with time travel, and he has to go into very specific moments to examine them. So that's my choice. Number 3, A Test of Strength. Well, instantly I think of Feats of Strength, some Festivus. But no, it's a book where the character has to pass a test of strength. And I did think of a recent book. I didn't talk about this book a whole lot, but in the Lois Lowry Quartet that I recently reread, in the final book, Sun, there is a character named Claire who has to spend an extensive amount of time physically training for her strength, for her agility, for her ability to conquer a very physically demanding task. And she has to really devote herself. And a person who has previously gone through this challenge is training her, and he's going to determine when she's ready to attempt the task. And it's very demanding, grueling, physical regimen of conditioning to get ready for this task. Number 4 is a character with a dark side or a temper. Well, again, there's a lot of great ways to go, but I thought of 2 books where actually pretty much everybody has a dark side, and I think it more like, not like dark side, like I'm thinking more like not just dead on villains, but the dark sides of human nature. I'm going to go with The Great Gatsby. I think that some characters more than others are explicitly depicted in the book as having darker sides to their nature, but I think they all do exhibit it in one way or the other. And this is a book that when you come back to it and you reread it at different points in your life, you see these people differently, and different aspects of that darkness or that moral ambiguity really come to light. So I feel like when I read it when I was really young, it was really obvious to me. It's always obvious what the problem is with Tom. You know, he's brutish, and he's a lout, and he cheats, and he's racist. But it takes further readings and more reflection to think about the dark sides of Daisy and Jay and Nick and Jordan. But it's complicated, and I haven't read it in a while. It's been I don't know, when was the last time I read it? Maybe 2 or 3 years ago. So it's coming up time to read again. It's one of my most frequently reread novels. But when I thought about dark sides and unsavory and gray areas of human nature, this did come to mind. The other one that I thought of that seems really obvious, but the person that I'm thinking about maybe is not so obvious, is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Now, obviously, Mrs. Danvers is a fantastic villain. Obviously, the narrator's husband, Maxime de Winter, is, questionable. How about some of these other characters? And specifically, what about our young narrator, who seems so naive and so clueless? But she's the one that surprised me most of all with some of the nastier aspects of her personality. So wonderful, psychologically creepy and weird and unsettling slow burn of a novel. Now that I know how plot-wise what happens, it's one of those ones where you need to know how it turns out, and then you can go back and relax into it and just look at all these characters and their machinations. Number 5 is A Quest Destroys Personal Life. A book where the quest is deemed so big the character either chooses to have no personal life or is destroyed. You know who I thought of right away is Gollum. And Gollum, of course, first appears in The Hobbit and then is also important in the rest of the Lord of the Rings series. When we first see Gollum, he's just sort of this monstrous little weird slimy dude in the dark in the water, and Bilbo finds Gollum's ring, and we eventually discover that Gollum has been searching for this lost ring for years and years, and we gradually begin to learn about the power of the ring and the negative effects it has on the bearer of the ring. So Gollum wasn't always Gollum, and Gollum's obsession with the ring and his devotion to the ring and his quest for the ring have destroyed him and made him what he is as he appears in these novels. I think that's a very common motif in fantasies and also in mystery or crime fiction as well, where somebody's becomes obsessed with a case to the expense of their personal life. And a lot of times in fantasy, somebody forswears relationships and family because of some sort of a mantle or a burden that's been placed upon them. So I'd love to hear other answers to this question besides Gollum, but he's the one that popped into my mind first. Number 6 is A Questionable Decision, a book where the main character makes a questionable decision. Well, I can think of a book that I really love where the character makes numerous questionable decisions, and that book is The Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. You knew it had to come. It's like a Rick roll. It's a Holden roll. I've got to put it into every tag possible. And Pat does too now. Well, we both are finding the relevance of Catcher in the Rye in almost every tag. And so just so many questionable decisions. Now, I kind of understand his first decision about leaving Pincy Prep ahead of that letter reaching his parents that tell them that he's been kicked out. But he picks a fight with his roommate before he leaves. And when he gets to New York, he makes me anxious every time, the way he is just spending money right and left on cab rides to nowhere. He gets somewhere he doesn't want to be there, he goes somewhere else. It's just an avalanche of wacky decisions. Some of them I can't even tell you because it would spoil the plot, and I know not everybody's read this book, but he's basically hanging out in New York, getting drunk, chain smoking, meeting up with people, falling out with people. He's just a mess, and every time he's kind of about to do something that makes sense, he suddenly doesn't do that and he does something else, and it never gets better anytime I read it. But he's just kind of a disaster. But of course, it is my favorite novel, and so I am there for this disaster to unfold time and again. Number 7, Scale Change. Oh, this one was really confusing to me. I didn't really understand what this was at first. And it says a book with an object or a place that goes through a scale change. So I was thinking, well, first I wasn't sure, but then I kind of understand this as being size or scope or perspective. The first one that I thought of was Room by Emma Donoghue, and this is a book that a lot of us read a number of years ago. Maybe you saw the movie too, but in this book, a young woman and her small son are imprisoned in a backyard, a shed basically. She has been imprisoned in this shed for several years by a man who abducted her, and it's called Room, and the story is from the point of view of the child, who I think is about 5 or 6 years old, and his entire life in this room. And everything he knows is what his mother has told him and taught him, and she's done the best she can to keep him healthy, to educate him, to entertain him, and eventually to prepare him for their attempted escape. And there is a huge scale change halfway through this book that I don't want to completely give away, but you just have to imagine if your entire universe was a small, dark room with a peephole and one other person, and then you saw the real world. What would that be like? How overwhelming would that be? Just the enormity of it all. So that one came to mind first. Number 8, Falling, or something to do with gravity. A book where someone or something is falling or where gravity plays a part. All right, so what I came up with for that one is Little Women by Louisa May Alcott, and I thought about Amy falling through the ice. And literally, she falls through the ice and it breaks the ice in a big frosty fight that she has been having with her sister Jo. And it brings to light for both of them how much they really love each other and cherish each other as sisters. And but Amy is such a pain in the rear, and she follows Jo and Lori when they go ice skating, and then she's super drama queen, so the ice cracks and they have to rescue her. So that's just one. That's not really a spoiler. It's not like, if you know anything about Little Women, that's not the person who dies in the middle of the book. But Jo and Amy butting heads in this novel is one of the key conflicts, and really has a lot to do with similarities in their personalities, but they think that they're differences. People that don't get along because they are similar never really realize that, do they? So anyway, I thought about Amy falling through the ice and the significance of that part of the book. A book that I haven't read yet that surely has something to do with gravity is Orbital by Samantha Harvey, because it's about some people out in space in a spaceship. So I'm just assuming gravity is at least mentioned in there. So I'm just going to throw that one in there too. Number 9, red herrings, false trails, and uses of codes. All right, I came up blank on the codes. I know I've read books where codes are important, but I did think for false trails and red herrings, it just made me think of just about every mystery novel ever. So as a group, I will say the Dublin Murder Squad books by Tana French, because I usually talk about the most recent Tana French books. I think that the Dublin Murder Squad books, I read all of them before I even started the channel, but they are more, a little bit more traditional police procedurals, at least. Well, maybe not the first one. That one's a little off kilter. In the Woods, I love that book. But the other ones, and the likeness is pretty weird too, come to think of it. But there's several in there, like Broken Harbor, and I don't know what. I'll put some pictures up on the screen. But they are police procedural mysteries within the detectives of a Dublin Murder Squad. It's a series, but they're not really sequential, because each one has a different protagonist who is the detective. But they are murder mysteries. There's red herrings and false clues, and you figuring out who you think did it. Number 10, Revenge or Punishment, a book with an elephant. A book with an elephant, of revenge or punishment. Oh, you know what? Didn't Water for Elephants have a revenge elephant in it? Oh my goodness. So I'm thinking of Hamlet, the quintessential revenge tale, and one of my favorite plays, and one of my favorite Shakespeare plays, Hamlet, revenge tale. If you prefer something more contemporary, I don't recommend starting here, but The Girl Who Kicked the Hornet's Nest is the third book in Stieg Larsson's series about Lisbeth Salander and Mikhail Blomkvist. And revenge is a theme throughout the whole series, but it kind of builds up to a crescendo in this third book, where Lisbeth is seeking revenge against the person in her life who caused so much trauma and hardship that kind of made her who she is today. The Rise and Fall, a book with a rise in status followed by a catastrophic fall. I immediately thought of the book I read in the group read for Victober last year, The Way We Live Now by Anthony Trollope. It is a very long book, but we broke it down and read it over the month of October, and it was so good and satisfying and juicy. There's a million characters, but it wasn't confusing, and nothing was extraneous. There was no, you didn't think, why is this book so long? They could have cut out 100 pages. It wasn't like that at all. And there was a main central character that financially and in his power and his social status and is a rising figure, and people are gravitating to him, and then some stuff happens. So that's that's the one that came to mind there. And then number 12 is a genius. Which writer to you is a genius, or a book with a character that is a genius? And I'm not going to try to be original here. I'm just going to say it's Percival Everett. My Percival Everett fandom is continuing unabated, and I'm not trying to abate it. And every book I read of his is different, refreshing, unexpected, differences in tone. There's certain elements where you think like, oh, this is a Percival Everett book, but it's really hard to define it. The books have been thought-provoking, sad, horrific, hilarious, sometimes all in the same chapter. And every time I read one of his books, I think, I really loved that. It's super hard to describe, and I don't know how he did that. So that's who I'm choosing for that answer. And then number 13, tag some others. As always, or not as always, but recently, I've never caught up. From whatever happened to me earlier this spring, I am still behind. This tag is a couple of weeks old at least, and I don't know who all has been tagged in the meantime. So please think about doing this tag if you hadn't, because it's really fun, and it was tough. It took me a while to come up with my answers. Even though I thought of great ones for each, I wanted to maybe not talk about the exact same things I always talk about. So I hope I succeeded at least halfway. I hope you had fun. Let me know if you have different answers to any of these questions down below, or what you think about these books, and I will be back for Friday Reads. Bye-bye.